For today's craft activity, all you're going to need is a glass jar. Any sort of empty glass jar will do. This one had some jam in, but you could use a coffee jar. Any sort, as long as it's clear, clean and empty. Give it a good wash. We're going to need some masking tape, optional. If you've got some, it's great to make sure we've got some nice straight lines in our design. Some craft wire, again optional, but finishes off the jar nicely when we've finished. And we're going to need some acrylic paint. I've just got 4 shades of acrylic paint today, a black, white and a light blue and a dark blue. And to go with our paint, we're going to need a thin paintbrush and a sponge, an artist's sponge or a washing up sponge, whatever you have will do. Right, so the very first thing we're going to do today is get some of our masking tape. We want to go all the way around the jar to make a horizon, like we did in the landscape painting recently. So wherever you want your horizon to be, I'm going to put it about there, about a third of the jar, nice and straight if we can, going all the way around. I put it a little bit lower than that actually. There we go. All the way around the jar, just to make sure we've got a nice straight horizon for our snowy scene. Right, the first thing we're going to need is some dark blue and a little bit of the lighter blue acrylic paints. Now we're going to get our sponge. We don't want to have a wet sponge and we don't want to water down our paint at all, because we want to keep it quite dry. So as you can see where I'm having a little practice on the cardboard here, makes quite a nice texture. We certainly don't want to wipe the paint on, we just want to dab it. And that's so that we can have this lovely texture, but also leave a lot of the clear glass still in between our colour, so that if we have a tea light or a battery operated tea light in our jar, when we finish painting it, the light will still shine through nicely. It's not going to block out that light. So dabbing the paint on all the way round, like so. Not right up to the top, or you can if you like. I've just done mine to here, just below where the thread at the top of the jar is. A good trick for doing this would be to, if you can, hold your glass jar from the inside, like so, to hopefully not get too covered in paint, although I'm sure I will anyway. So dabbing that dark blue on all the way around, and you can see I've left a little gap between the masking tape and the paint at the moment, because I'm going to add this lighter shade of blue down the bottom there, just to give our sky some lovely tones to it. So all the way around. Remember, not wiping at all, just carefully dabbing with our dry sponge. To give that lovely texture that our light's still going to be able to shine through as well. There we go, I think that'll just about do. Now you're going to want to let this dry and come back to it in a minute. Right, as you can see, I've just taken the masking tape off now, and we've got a lovely straight line for our sky, our horizon. So now we're going to need to put in the ground, the snow. So we're going to need some white acrylic paint now. And using exactly the same technique that we did for the sky, with our sponge, I'm going to use the other side of the sponge. Again, dry a dry sponge. We don't want any extra water in it or added to it, because we want that nice texture for the snow. So going all the way around, I'm not going to tape anything off again, but using the flat edge of the sponge I can make sure that I only go up to and slightly over the horizon. I'll go round, dabbing in that snowy ground underneath our blue sky. Again, we're not wiping, we just want to use a very dry sponge and keep that lovely texture. Like I said, also keeping the gaps in between the paint, so that if we have a candle or a little battery light inside our jar, it's still going to be able to shine through beautifully. So all the way around, see, it makes a very nice sort of, looks very much like some nice fluffy snow. All the way around, doesn't matter if you come above your horizon line at all. You can even do it on purpose and make some sort of hills in the background if you like. But as you can see, I've accidentally wiped the paint, and you see that's not ideal. We just want to dab with our sponge and keep that soft, snowy texture and translucent effect. And I'd say that that's just about done for the snow. You're going to want to leave that to dry again. Okay, now we're ready to use our black paint. And that's the last of the colours that we've got. It's amazing what beautiful things you can create using a very, very limited palette. So, I've got my black paint, and I've got a very thin little paintbrush to do some nice detail. You may want a couple of brushes. I've sort of got two quite thin brushes that I'm going to use to paint some wintry trees onto this jar now. And again, we don't want to add any extra water or thinner to our acrylic paint, and we don't want the brushes too wet either, because we want the paint to be nice and thick and opaque and block out the light. Unlike what we've done with the sponge and the background, we want these trees to be at the foreground and blocking out any light, creating a nice effect. So applying it quite thick, you've got to be brave and start to add in these wintry trees. Now, as with all things in nature, trees aren't perfect, so don't worry too much about where you're going with this. In fact, if you've got slightly shaky hands, all the better. We can make some really nice trees. Shaky hands as well. So I'll use my slightly thicker brush to do the trunk. Now I'm going to use this thin brush to add some branches. You don't have to do trees like this. If you wanted to experiment, you could, using a similar idea, using this dark black paint thicker onto the background to create sort of a silhouette effect, really. You could do some little trees, some Christmas trees. You could do a snowy village, perhaps. There's all sorts of designs that you could do. But I'm just going to show you this really simple one today. I'd love to know if you came up with anything different. So there's one. We're going to put a few of them all around the jar. This takes some time, but take your time. And enjoy creating. You might want to have a practice on a bit of paper first to get the hang of drawing these trees, or just go straight for it. I'm sure it's going to look lovely. I think I've got room for one more. Starting off with our trunk and separating into some smaller branches. And so on. And I think that will do. And now we're going to need to let this dry for a little bit. Right, next I'm going to add a little bit of extra detail with a little bit more white paint. And this time I am going to add a little bit more water to it because we want to sort of splatter it across our picture, across the top, and it's going to look, well, might look a little bit like stars, a little bit like snow. So one way you can do that is by, well, let's see if this will work. It needs to be quite wet to be able to do that. Or another way, I've got a slightly flatter brush, but any brush will do. Getting that watered down paint and flicking it. It's going to make a bit of a snowstorm effect. To our winter tree scene. Lovely. As you can see, I think it's turned out really quite well. lovely little winter scene, which was actually very, very simple to do. Now we've just got one more thing to do to our jar, to turn it into a little lantern. And that's where this craft wire comes in. What we're going to do is wrap it round the top and create a handle. Firstly, see how much of the handle we're going to want. I say, let's see, it's up to you, and it will vary on depending on what size your jar is. I'm going to say about like that. And we're going to wrap the wire around the jar. And where we've got the thread at the top, it should sit under that, keep it secure. When you've wrapped it around sufficiently, you're going to either want to shorten the ends or just wrap them around until they're gone, but be sure to carefully fold the edges out of harm's way, as they can be a little sharp. And there we go, one lovely little hanging lantern Christmas decoration. And as you can see, now I've got the tea light candles in there as well. They look absolutely lovely. Those trees that we did in the black acrylic paint, stopping the light getting through, making a silhouette. And the background and snow that we put on with the sponge is allowing the light to come through beautifully. Another great idea to do with these glass jars is just to mix up some glitter with some PVA glue and paint a coat of that over them. And that makes a lovely sparkly tea light holder as well. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed today's workshop. Wishing you all a Merry Christmas.